Welcome to Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg. And the bad idea that we're talking about today is a movie. We used to talk about movies a lot, Tony.
Yeah, we did. We also talked about this one a lot, even though we never formally reviewed it.
We never got around to it. For 250 episodes of our movie review podcast, the Human Echoes podcast, we never did get around to watching The Room. The Room, if you are not aware of it, is a movie that was released in 2003. It's the meandering story of a love triangle between a man named Johnny, his fiancée Lisa, and their friend Mark. And this film was produced, written, directed, quote unquote. There's some speculation and disputation about this one, Tony. Some other people think that they deserve the directing credit for The Room, which is a little bit hilarious. And starring a man named Tommy Wiseau.
Tommy Wiseau is like one of the weirdest characters I've ever seen in anything. Like, I've read The Disaster Artist, I saw The Room. I've heard weird things about this guy. I've seen his YouTube videos. And I don't know if it's like CTE from a car accident, if he's just weird. Like, I don't know what's going on with him, but he is one of the strangest characters that exists on planet Earth.
He is. I hope we'll get a little bit more opportunity to talk about him as we go through here. But the movie itself, let's just set you guys up with what this thing is. It was made on a budget of $6 million. It's an independent feature, Tony. Like, independent. Not like Fox Searchlight independent movie, okay? Like, one person, namely Tommy Wiseau, decided he was going to make a movie, and he spent $6 million on this thing that he came up with out of his head.
Yeah, and like, he probably could have done it for significantly less, but there are a lot of weird filming things that he ended up doing for this.
There are many strange decisions. When it was released in 2 theaters in Hollywood, soon to be cut down to 1 theater after its initial release. And its entire run in those theaters, Tony, brought in a grand total of $1,900. However, since that time, it has become known as one of the best bad movies of all time.
And it earns that title. It really does.
We talked about Tommy Wiseau in the beginning here, and it's interesting to me. I did a reasonable amount of research about this. There are more than one book written about this. I read The Disaster Artist by Greg Sestero, a star in the movie. There are books other than that one about this one terrible movie. There is a massive fan community. There are traditions built around this movie. And in spite of all that we know about it, in spite of the many, many people who love this movie and Tommy Wiseau dearly, we know very little about him.
Yeah, he's kind of a mystery man. Nobody knows how he made his money. Nobody knows where, like, what country he's from. Most people speculate that it's France, but that's kind of disputed.
Well, he speaks with a French accent that seems like he picked it up from a different country. It's almost definite that he spent some time in France at some point, but where he came from to get there is unclear. He claims to have spent significant time in Louisiana and have family there, but we don't know who those people are. We don't know how old he is. During the timeline of the book, The Disaster Artist, which is being made into a movie now, partly why we're doing this episode now, kind of jumping on that hype train, Tony, he had claimed that his age was somewhere in his late 20s. And Greg Sestero, who was 18 or 19 at the time, was like, yeah, no, this guy's at least 40. And some research into his backstory implies that he may have been born as long ago as the late 1950s. And all of that is complicated by the fact that at times Tommy Wiseau has claimed to be a vampire.
It really, like, if there was somebody who was actually a vampire, Tommy Wiseau would be it. Like, do we have any footage of him actually being outside?
I mean, I think, yeah, so in The Room, some of the exterior shots are outside, even though they're also green screen. We'll get to that. You mentioned this earlier. The source of his wealth is a bit of a mystery, also. He claimed to do odd jobs and work his way up the ladder in Los Angeles. We know that he owns a clothing company called Street Fashions USA, but it seems like the kind of thing that would not provide you with the kind of income that this guy has.
Yeah, it looks like a front. Like, it really does.
There are speculations that the room itself was a money laundering scheme. I will say that the closest person to that, and the one who's talked about it most extensively, Greg Sestero, says he does not believe that. But there are many unanswered questions about Tommy Wiseau, and I'm sorry to say we will not be answering them here. I did not get on the horn with any investigative journalism and crack open some new egg for you guys. I read all the stuff that I could read. It's still kind of a mystery to me.
It's still a mystery to Greg Sestero, and he lived with him for years.
That's true. What we do know about Tommy, though, is that at some point in his life, he decided that he wanted to be famous. And it was probably inspired by a car accident that almost took his life. Early on in the book, The Disaster Artist, Greg Sestero talks about how Tommy mentioned that he had been out of commission for 6 months after a really bad car accident. And it seems like it was one of those watershed moments where this guy who had been through whatever he was gone through in his life decided that he was going to stop dicking around and chase his dreams. And his dream was that he was going to be a movie star. He was going to be famous. And so, what do you do when you want to be a movie star? You move to Hollywood and you take acting lessons. And acting lessons is where Greg Sestero, the author of our best look into Tommy Wiseau's life, The Disaster Artist, meets him. This is a young kid who's also got the dream of Hollywood in his eyes, and he thinks he can be an actor. He's got some bit parts in some various movies, and he's trying to work his way up the ladder, and he goes to these acting classes and meets this bizarre character named Tommy Wiseau. And Tommy was completely unafraid, just totally self-assured, but also completely unaware of himself and what he looked like to everybody else.
What he looked like, what he sounded like, how he took lines, like it was all completely like it. I can't imagine watching a video of myself doing that poorly and thinking, "Oh, that works."
And I don't. You mentioned the possibility of brain damage. That's possible. There's also the cross-cultural thing. I don't know. I would not begin to speculate exactly where this comes from. Maybe he's just a weird dude, Tony.
Very well could be. Like, the only reason I brought up the brain damage is it's kind of the way he has a drawl on it, like where he sounds almost a little bit punch drunk. So I've kind of wondered if that was from that car accident. So, like, if possibly why his accent is so bizarre is it's like a mix between the French, then like the Louisiana, then a little bit of like the CTE or something like that, causing it to be more drawn out.
Well, that's all speculation, Tony. But what we do know is that in 2001, Tommy Wiseau began working on a script for a movie that would be titled The Room. And the movie that inspired him to make this film was a movie called The Talented Mr. Ripley with Matt Damon in it. And Greg Sestero talks about this movie a lot in his book and how interesting it is that Tommy Wiseau sees this movie about an imposter, and instead of seeing all the subtext and layers about the imposter, he sees the guy that the imposter is pretending to be and essentially wants to become him. And that's kind of what Tommy does. He imposters his way into this movie with enough money to bluff his way in, but he creates this role for himself. It was originally intended to be a stage production. Then he tried it as a book. Nobody wanted to buy it. And finally, he decided he was going to make a movie. And he knew, he had enough self-awareness to know that if he tried to go to the regular studios with he probably didn't think it was a bad script, but, you know, these dumb studios that can't see what a genius Tommy Wiseau is, if Tommy Wiseau goes to them with his script, they're not going to make his movie. So he knows he has to produce it himself, despite the fact that he has zero experience with filmmaking. And the first clue that we get that he has so little experience with filmmaking is that The way he goes about this production is super weird. First of all, he buys all of his equipment rather than renting, which is your standard, indie budget thing. You get a camera for a month. You don't need it for forever, so why would you buy it for forever?
Especially when the technology changes so quickly. The people that were renting out the cameras must have been so happy they had some guy to buy their equipment.
They were happy. They were so happy that they gave him a film crew to ensure that he kept the camera for the 90 days that he had to keep it before he couldn't return it anymore. The first sign that he doesn't know what he's doing, though, is that he gets 2 cameras, actually. He gets a film camera and a digital camera in 2001. And he puts them on this janky mounts where there's a film camera on one side and a digital camera on the other side. And he shoots his movie with both. I've read the suggestions that it was because he just didn't understand the difference between film and digital, and he wanted to have both things available.
Well, he also wanted to be able to say he was the first movie to ever do it. Just like the weird little ego thing that comes with being the first at anything.
I guess, but it's like, I'm the first guy who walked across America in those weird aerator shoes that they used to sell to poke holes in your lawn. There's no good reason to do that. Nobody has done it yet. But sure, go ahead and be the first. It doesn't make any sense, though. Further weirdness to do with the production of this movie, when the sets were being built inside the soundstage here. So, you know how, when you shoot a movie or a TV show, a lot of times you're not in an actual room. They'll have a fake room that's built, and you can move the walls or whatever if you need to have more room for the camera to move around. On these sound stages where these fake rooms are being built, he has a bathroom built with full working plumbing. He's renting the soundstage out. He's supposed to be using it for his movie, but in the middle of also building all these sets, he has them build this working bathroom that only he was allowed to use on the set.
That's where he kept the coffin.
He was also notoriously late every day. He
was late to the first day of production because he was dyeing his hair black. He wanted it to be blacker, so he ended up being multiple hours late to the first day of him being a director.
In addition to all of those things, they built a set to look like an alleyway, despite the abundance of actual alleyways in LA. And for scenes that were supposed to take place on a rooftop, Tommy built a set that was supposed to mimic a rooftop in the parking lot of the studio, and then surrounded it with green screen, and later digitally added in a rooftop for his rooftop scenes, instead of actually just shooting on a rooftop.
It's I'm sure the studio had a rooftop.
Or somewhere
must have
had a rooftop.
You're spending $6 million. You can afford the permit to do a couple days on a rooftop somewhere. But he
had a building with a rooftop. Here's the thing. Tommy Wiseau, one of his ventures is that he rents out real estate. He owns buildings that do have roofs and tops on those roofs.
Yeah, I remember that was actually the end of The Disaster Artist. Greg Sestero was on a building that had a plaque with his name on it. It was one of those where it's how did this happen? Why are we even here? How do you afford this building in LA?
With the giant American flag hanging off of it.
Yeah.
In addition to these many problems, Tommy also proved to be an exceptionally poor actor. He had considerable difficulty remembering his lines. He couldn't hit his marks. He didn't know where his eye lines were. And in one scene, and you can see this dramatized in the trailer for The Disaster Artist, Tony, they show him trying to get this right. He does 32 takes of one scene where he walks out of a door, rants that he did not hit his girlfriend, and then says, "Oh, hi, Mark." It's 3 lines. And they had to do 32 takes over 2 days to get this one line reading right.
Yeah, and it's there are directors that do that sort of thing. David Fincher, he did 75 takes for just in Zodiac where they're on the courthouse steps. And it was a very minimal scene. There were only a couple lines. But almost every time they were hitting their lines perfectly. He just wanted all the takes. It took 32 takes for Tommy Wiseau to actually land it.
Yes, it's not like on the 32nd one, it was all of a sudden, this is an amazing take. It was the 32nd one, he managed to get the words out and they said, finally, we can do something else with this movie.
That was also a really weird sequence because it just shows how tonally that movie is off. He's like, I did not hear her. Oh, hi, Mark. And it's just like completely back to happy. Like, it's just so inconsistent and weird.
It's true, and there are very few ways in which this film makes sense. The plot is inconsistent. There are many plot threads that are just unresolved. Characters disappear. Motivations are murky at best. The tonal range of a single actor's lines can just range throughout a single line from one emotion to another, and not in like a good acting way, in like a do you understand how human beings work kind of way. To give you a taste of how closely Tommy Wiseau pays attention to detail, the character of Mark in the play was supposed to be named after Matt Damon. Remember I mentioned the talented Mr. Ripley earlier? But Tommy Wiseau didn't know Matt Damon's name. He misheard Matt Damon and thought it was Mark Damon. And in tribute to Mark Damon and his amazing performance in The Talented Mr. Ripley, he named the character of Mark in his screenplay after that actor, Mark Damon.
Matt Damon's older brother.
When the film was finished, for lack of a better word, Tommy submitted it to Paramount, hoping that they would distribute it. And it normally takes about 2 weeks for Paramount to process a request for you to distribute their film. The Room got rejected within 24 hours.
So somebody just like turned it on like 4 minutes in. They were like, no, what is this garbage?
I just want to imagine that they have somebody who just had a psychic sense. They took it out, they looked at it, and they said, no.
Or was the person that actually like got the film handed to it by Tommy Wiseau, and they were like, tomorrow I'll tell him no.
However, Tommy was not daunted by this. So remember, he has $6 million to pay for his movie to be made. So he has money to pay for a theater to show his movie. And there are theaters in LA that will do this for people who have enough money to spend. So he rents out these 2 theaters. He puts up a confusing billboard. And this is iconic at this point, but it's interesting how unhelpful the billboard is. It says The Room, all right, it has some credits and stuff. I think probably has Tommy Wiseau's name about 8 times. And then it has a picture of Tommy Wiseau looking like some kind of Quasimodo hunchback character glowering into a, like, directly out of the sign in black and white with the half-closed lid and his hair all wild, and it's not a representation of how he is in the film at all. It makes the movie look like a horror film, and it's not. I mean, it's horrifying, but not in the sense that, like, it's trying to be scary. It's just bad.
Yeah, like, that's the headshot you pick for that.
The billboard, to continue the bizarre saga of Tommy having so much money to burn, this thing cost $5,000 a month, and it stayed up for more than 5 years. It became an LA landmark. People would make pilgrimages to go and have their picture taken by this crazy billboard for this crazy movie.
If I was in LA after seeing this movie, I might have done that.
I think I would too at this point. I don't know that it's still up now. Although it's one of those things at a certain point, you almost hate to see it come down. It's like the Hollywood
sign. It needs to be
sign.
A historic landmark.
As you might expect, The Room's initial critical reception was substantially negative. Critics just hated it. People laughed even in the cast and crew screening at the film. The actors were somewhat embarrassed. The theaters began to institute a no refund policy because people were leaving 30 minutes into the film and asking for their money back. But there started to be a little bit of a backlash to this negative reaction. Not a backlash necessarily, but people seeing how negatively this film was being received got a sense of morbid curiosity. The theater, in an attempt to stop people from asking for refunds, first of all, they put up the words "no refunds" by the room when people were going to see it, but also they posted a blurb outside the theater so you would know what kind of movie you were getting into. Remember, this is essentially the quote they put on the poster to make you not come see this movie at the theater. And the quote was from a review that said, "This film is like being stabbed in the head." And people, having seen the no refund sign and "this film is like being stabbed in the head" quote, decided that this was a movie they had to see. And most notably, I saw one of the guys who was responsible for the 5-second films series. I believe that's on YouTube. He became a huge fan of this and started promoting it to other friends of his as this bizarrely hilarious bad film, and people started flocking to it. They started doing things where they would throw spoons at the screen because of the scenes where there are just spoons taped to the walls of the room because they had no set decoration. They had things where they would throw footballs around in the theater because there are so many scenes of people throwing footballs around in this film, which is kind of hilarious because, as Greg Sestero points out in his book, that's actually a really complicated thing to get right continuity-wise, even if you're good at movies.
I can imagine that because there's so many angles you have to film from and everything. And it also doesn't help that Tommy Wiseau might be the worst at throwing a football of any human that's ever lived.
If you've never seen the film, I found this quote from the co-author of The Disaster Artist, Tom Bissell, who helped Greg Sestero put the story together. And this is what he said about The Room. He said, "It is like a movie made by an alien who has never seen a movie, but has had movies thoroughly explained to him. There's not often that a work of film has every creative decision that's made in it on a moment-by-moment basis seemingly be the wrong one."
And what's funny to me about this is, like, with DVD sales and with this cult following, it's had to have made its money back by now, if not exceeded it by far.
It might have made it back by now, but $6 million is a lot to make back in DVD sales.
That's true.
I mean, even with the cult following and the midnight screenings, by now possibly, but you got to remember, for the first 5 years, he was outlaying $5,000 a month for this billboard and getting nothing back for it, practically. So he kept spending money on this film that was already a money pit, and nobody understood where the money had come from. Tommy claims that there were investors besides himself. There's no direct evidence of that, but that was the story he told people.
Yeah, it's like $300,000 for a billboard. Who knows how much for how long he had to rent out that theater.
Who knows? But in the end here, this is kind of a happy ending to this story. I think about Tommy Wiseau, and I don't know this guy's story, but I know that at the time that we meet him, he's alone, and he's kind of broken, and he's sort of fed up with life. He's gotten to the point where he's sort of done trying to do the conventional thing, and he's decided that he's going to screw it all and go in all in for this big Hollywood dream. There are indications that he had been badly hurt in personal relationships in the past, and that The Room is sort of his vaguely autobiographical tale of being cheated on by a woman somewhere. And for this guy who had lost friends that he had trusted, it would seem, at one point, and found new friends and written himself into this bizarre new fame, it's a weirdly happy ending. Maybe the happiest ending he could hope for.
Yeah, it's definitely the happiest ending a vampire can hope for.
It's true. And I don't know. The bad idea here is obviously every decision that was made surrounding The Room. Nobody should make a movie like this. All the decisions were bad. Maybe the only good thing Tommy did was finding Greg Sestero and befriending him. And maybe that was enough in the end, because Greg championed his cause, wrote the book The Disaster Artist about it. He co-starred in his movie. and made it everything that he could, even though he's not, I mean, like 1,000 other actors trying to make it in Hollywood, he's not bad, but he's not anything great. And these guys found some kind of friendship, and that was the only good idea, and that was enough. I hate to get sappy here at the end, Tony, but this story makes me a little bit sappy.
It's a little bit. It earns it.
So I know that there was not a lot in there that people could not find in other places. I want to acknowledge that if you are already an aficionado of The Room, you did not learn anything new in this episode, most likely. But I hope that those of you who are more casually interested in it found something interesting in here. We have not yet seen The Disaster Artist, the new James Franco movie, but I have to say I'm very pumped for it. I've heard good things, and I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, I am too. Like, that's what I'm actually going to go like opening weekend for.
And I am looking forward to seeing y'all next week for another episode of the Bad Ideas Show. As always, if you have bad ideas you would like to cover, you can send them in to badideashow@gmail.com. And if you like the show and you want to help us make it more and more, you can go to patreon.com/humanechoes. And become a patron there and get access to awesome stuff like the bonus podcast and early releases of our videos and t-shirts and pins and all kinds of jazz like that. I don't know why I got all funky at the end there, Tony.
It's okay. We will see you guys next week with more bad ideas, and be sure to check out our YouTube channel too, because we have tons of stuff there.
Bye, guys.
Bye.